And this class is definitely meant to be interactive, so please take time to ask questions, challenge anything that I teach today, because that's how we all learn. I know that you guys are out there writing offers and maybe seeing different things. I'm out reviewing offers and seeing what you're doing. So I'm really excited to teach this class. I've taught a lot of contract classes, and I know there's a lot of different ways to write up contracts. One of the things Nadine had pointed out was in my description, we were talking about multiple offers, how to handle those, maybe how to write them up, especially to make them a little bit more attractive. So any of those type of comments that you have, I encourage you to bring those to the table. So what we're going to do is I'm going to do a screen share, and that's really how we're going to get this started. Is I'm going to be using our Zip Form Plus. Let's see here. Let's do the screen share first. And go there. Okay, so the difficulty here is I'm sharing a second screen, so you might see my eyes go over here to this screen if you can still see me. That's one of the things that's interesting with when I teach a class like this is, let me double check here. I think I can still see you guys, but there's sometimes a problem with how it goes over where I can't see you. So if you're raising a hand or something like that to ask a question, I can't necessarily see that. So really, I'm going to encourage you that when you have a question, just unmute yourself, interrupt, and I'll try to do the best I can to answer that question. Or I may say, hey, let's put this out to the crowd, see what everybody thinks about this. So right now, obviously, I'm logged into Zip Form Plus. Today, our goal is to get through the first 3 pages. This is a 2-part class. So we've got about an hour of time, and I want to get us out on time right at noon if we can. But obviously it depends on the number of questions that you guys have. And we are going to, again, it's going to be a 2-part class. So the first section is the pages 1 through 5. And the second section would be obviously everything that we don't complete today to the end of the transaction. I have, what I have here is a training example. If you log into Zoom, I'm sure that there are different ways that people view their documents. When I double click on this, it will go into our documents. And I set up templates when I work in Zip Forms. So as you go into the documents, you'll see that I have a lot of different folders. I put my folders together based on different meetings I have with my clients. And so when I'm getting ready to write an offer, I have a before the offer folder, a writing offer folder, if it applies to the situation, and then other later documents if needed. And so as I'm going into this, we're really just going to, there's something happening on my screen here. I'm going to X out of that over here. Okay, so like I said, if you go into any of these folders, you're going to see other documents. This is what I use when I have like a pre-meeting with my clients and I'm trying to get them to sign on with me as a buyer's agent. But today, what we're actually talking about is writing the offer and the residential sale agreement. So we're going to load up this form, and what I'm going to do here to make it easier to see is I'm going to blow it up. And again, unmute yourself if you cannot see this. I want to make sure that everybody can see this really well. I have pre-filled out a lot of this just to keep the class moving along. One of the first things you're obviously going to do is up here in this section, you're going to choose a sale agreement number. That can be any number or set of numbers or set of characters that you choose to use. In this situation, the property is on Galloway. See down here on Galloway Street. So I usually use the first few letters of the street name, and then I like to use the date. And so that's how I choose my particular, just to kind of keep a consistent order as to how I'm filling out the sale agreement. How do you guys, what kind of things do you guys choose for your sale agreement number?
I think Stacy told me that it was like the month and then how many transactions. So if that was their first transaction, it would be like, 4-1, and then something like that. But I've
Okay.
I've never had an accepted offer, so this doesn't really matter.
Okay. Sometimes people will use the client's last name or the agent's last name. Whatever you do, I just say do it consistently. So that way, if you ever need to search through documents or something like that and search for something, you're able to come up with what you're looking for. So obviously, in this situation, I am the buyer's agent. If you have two agents that are working on the same contract, then there is another space over here to put the second agent's name. Carol and I work together as a team, essentially to cover each other when we're on vacation and whatnot. But the information that goes here is going to be my Oregon license number, okay? And then beyond that, obviously, we're going to have Coldwell Banker Professional Group, whichever office you're in, the license number for that office, and then your contact number information. I always encourage to put your phone number as the first phone number, and then to use the office's main number as the second number. Just in case for some reason, you are not able to be found or reached out to, it's important to have two numbers on there. And then of course, your email address is just as important, because that's basically we're explaining to all the parties in this first agency acknowledgement section of who is working for who and who are the relationships. And so in this situation, Richard Jones with Banana Realty, we obviously made up a company on the other side in this situation, his license number and the company license number, their location, and then their phone numbers and whatnot. In a situation where you're working with two different companies, I am working for the buyer exclusively, and Richard Jones is working for the seller exclusively. That way the buyer and the seller know who's working for who, and it explains that here. When they sign off on this section, it's important to read a lot of this stuff. So can I have somebody read this section that I'm highlighting for me?
It's really tough, but I'll try if you want.
Okay.
If both parties are each represented by one or more agents in the same real estate firm, and agents are supervised by the same principal broker in the real estate firm, buyer and seller acknowledge said principal broker shall become the disclosed limited agent for both buyer and seller, as more fully explained in the disclosed limited agency agreements that have been reviewed and signed by the buyer, sellers, and agents.
Okay. So in a situation where we've got two agents out of the same office, essentially, we are not working for both the buyer and the seller, but we are, as a brokerage, the disclosed limited agent. Does that make sense? I hope it does. And then you're going to have your buyer's names here. In some situations, you have more than one buyer, right? So where do you put those extra names? Because they only give you two places for them to sign off on. Well, in this situation, we've actually got four sellers. We got Anita Bath, Lowest Denominator, all of you, and Ida Bug. All four of those people are going to need to sign off. So you're going to have their signatures just in this first section right here would be signature number 1, signature number 2 would go in this area, signature number 3 there, and signature number 4. So you're going to have to kind of pack them in when you do either in-person signatures, but that is, in my opinion, the best way to do that. Any questions so far? Okay, moving on. This is where the actual contract then really begins. I mean, the contract as a whole does begin up here, and this talks about the relationships of who's working for who, but this is what the buyer and seller are really interested in understanding. We obviously have this disclaimer up here that this is intended to be a legal and binding contract. If not understood, we want to make sure that the buyer and the seller know that they can seek competent legal advice before signing. For an explanation of the printed terms and provisions in this form regarding the timing, notice, binding effect, etc., the seller and buyer are encouraged to closely review the definitions and instructions section below. So in the past, we used to have the definitions and instructions at the beginning of the contract, and it became this section that got bigger and bigger and bigger. And so what they decided to do was take that section and put it lower in the contract, but make note of it here at the beginning of the contract. So that section talks about a lot of times of who is who in the contract, who is the seller defined as, who's the buyer defined as, so on and so forth. But that section is further down in the contract. And I believe it's on like page 8 or 9. It might even be on the close to the last page. When you are filling out these contracts, the beauty is obviously when I change any of this information, if it's Augusta wine, that will change any of the section down in here as well. So all you have to do is enter one time the buyer or seller's name, and then every place that it is referred to, whether it be on this document or any addendums proceeding, it will auto-populate that information. If for some reason you make a a typo, we had a client the other day, last name was Wolf, we didn't realize that it had an E on the end, then you obviously can make those changes to it later. And again, once you make that change in this system, it changes all of the documents and updates them all. This particular property is in Yamhill County, so we obviously that's what we're talking about here. Commonly or known to, and defined as, here's where you're going to put in as much information as you know about the property and be real specific. Anytime you're buying a property, anytime a buyer is purchasing a property, they are not purchasing the physical address or the mailing addresses, sometimes we know it. So, and this actually happened to me where I purchased a property in Hillsborough. It started out when we purchased it in 2003 as being on 242nd Street. And that was because the Portland addresses going out that far out into Hillsborough, we were on 242nd Street, kind of like as you go further east out into Gresham, you were on probably northeast 242nd. Well, as things change and update, and obviously we lived in Hillsborough, the city of Hillsborough decided to take over naming that street or changing something in that area. It was probably as things were being updated. And so all of a sudden, probably a year after we had purchased our property, our address changed to 55th Avenue. So it was still 211 was the start of our address, but it changed from being on southwest 242nd to being 211 northeast 55th Avenue, because now the center point of that address was out to 55th. All that to say is our tax ID number and our legal description never changed. And so what you purchase when you're purchasing property is both that tax ID and that legal description. Sometimes when you're purchasing property, there's actually more than one tax ID or more than one legal description. So it's really important that you really look into and talk with the listing agent as far as what is being purchased here. Is it more than one tax ID number? Is it just one? What is the legal description? And so you should be able to find all of that information and put that down here on the lower lines. This is what go ahead.
If I can just an experience share.
Yeah.
There's times when the fire department will change the housing numbers just so they can see things better when they're going through. So that happened to me once. Also, and this is happening a lot lately, there's a lot of plat divisions happening. And if it's happening or it hasn't been recorded properly, if you look at the tax statement, you may see one thing, but it's in the process of being replatted or subdivided. And so that can change. So very important, even throughout the process, in my opinion, is to not only look at the tax statement, but also compare that with the plat map and the preliminary title report to make sure you have the right one. The only thing different I do on here, Trevor, is on line 36, I put the tax plat and map number on there.
And that is a great suggestion. Essentially, what we're trying to do is all of this contract information is going over to the title company for them to then identify what is it we're all agreeing on it's being purchased and exchanged for money versus a deed. And so thank you so much for that input, Nadine. So again, you put in, what was it?
The tax, map, and plat number. It's the 0723 Northwest CA lot 00415, for example.
Okay. So she's putting in those specific ranges. Where do you find this information, right? So that's probably a question a lot of times that people have. So I'm going to grab just this address. And unfortunately, I can't show in maybe everybody's MLS, but at least I can show in our MLS how you can go and find that tax information. So if I open up our MLS, obviously I've got to log in. You should obviously be having all of this information up and open before you are writing up a contract. And as I was writing this up, this is an old one. That's why I was using an old property. But anytime you're looking at the, this is a starting point, right? The title company, that's really why it's important that we are using title companies in these exchanges, is that as you look at this listing that this agent listed, this property, there's the tax ID number down here that you can go to. And usually on every MLS, there's a tax ID link so that you can go and look at the tax records if the MLS. Nadine, does the MLS out on the coast, they pull in the tax records and stuff like that? You have a way of flipping back and forth with screens like this? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And so what I tend to look at is I'm looking for the tax ID number. Okay, and so I would go down to, where is it here? They changed this about a year and a half ago. And so it always takes me a little more time to, oh, here it is, it's right up here at the top. So this is one of the things that I might cut and paste and put on the, onto the offer. Another thing that I will go down do is the legal description. So I might cut and paste this. This is the legal description. Okay. What Nadine was talking about was using things like the lot. Okay. Down here, the lot number, the township. I think it was the township and the range. Is that right?
Well, see where it says right under legal information, it says alternate property ID.
Alternate property ID.
Right. 3 lines above where you're highlighted.
Okay.
And it says R44116CD.
Oh, there, right there. There we go. Uh-huh. That number right there?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. So you'll use the numbers within there? Is that what you're saying?
Well, what you have highlighted is an abbreviated or combined of the map code, township, range, and section.
Okay.
So you'll see.
So it's
4
taking
south, 4 west is the 4-4.
Okay. So it's taking this information and putting it in a condensed version. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
Thank you. Okay. A little education there for me as well. Like I said, there are always times that I learn something from other great agents in these type of classes. Let's go back to the contract. We are at about 20 minutes and we're still on page 1, so I'm going to move a little bit faster. Obviously, over here, we're going to put in the purchase price that the agent is, the buyer is offering to the seller. So this is the purchase price. Then we're going to talk about earnest money. What typically right now is everybody seeing in earnest money? What are the ranges that we're seeing in earnest money offered?
In a normal market, it's about 1%. In this crazy market, it's whatever.
Unlimited. Anybody else have any input on what you're seeing as far as what your clients are willing to offer for earnest money?
I usually do 1 to 3%, or at least I offer that and kind of say what Nadine say. In a normal market, it's 1%, but you may want to go, up a little bit to the 3% there.
Okay. And just as an explanation, if you're a brand new agent, what is earnest money? Earnest money is that the buyer is saying, I am earnest about buying this property. And so because, Mr. Seller, you're putting up your house as I guess I'm forgetting the term of it. Basically, you're putting up your house as part of this contract. I need to put up something that I am willing to lose out on if I don't keep up my end of the contract. And so that's what earnest money is. It puts a slightly, the seller obviously has even more to lose, but it puts some stake in the game for the buyer that they need to keep up their end of the contract, or this is what they can lose out on. And what it states in the contract is that the buyer cannot be sued for anything more. So the earnest money is what can be lost if the buyer does not keep up their portion of the contract. Now there's a section here on line 41 that talks about as additional earnest money, the sum of, a lot of times we don't use that, but what are situations where we might use additional earnest money? Can anybody give us an example?
On a new construction, you may do a non-refundable if you're customizing a new construction home.
Yes, that makes total sense, because maybe the buyer is picking out specific counters and stuff like that. And so the seller is having to put up more money or make changes and do something specific to that buyer. And so making earnest money that's non-refundable later puts more stake in the game, more reason as to why the buyer would not back out of the contract. But if for some reason life happens and they have to, there's the understanding that that money might be lost. Now, additional earnest money is not always lost. There's, again, provisions in which in the contract we'll explain later as to when the buyer can back out during certain sections. Did anybody else have a question in there? I heard a voice. Any other situations where you might put additional earnest money down? Okay. In this situation, the buyer is putting down 10% of the purchase price as a down payment, and then they are financing the rest of that. So when we talk about 10% down, what we're doing is we're adding the numbers in this section right here. Lines B, C, and D would be the 10% that goes down. And when you add those numbers, that's $40,000. That's 10% of $400,000. And that shows that then they are essentially financing the $360,000. Does anybody else write it up differently than that? What is typically an FHA portion down? Can anybody tell me?
3.5.
Yeah.
3.5% down. So you need to do the math on that and make sure that only 3.5 is these three numbers combined. Okay. What does a VA loan tend to be? Anybody know a down payment of a VA loan?
Heather's saying 0.
A lot of times it's 0 down, right? So a lot of times in that situation, at closing, a buyer may take that earnest money, and that earnest money basically then goes towards their closing costs. It doesn't go towards the down payment because the amount that is financed is 100% of the loan. What about conventional financing? What are typically the different percentages that you see conventional financing at? Anyone?
10 to 20.
10 to 20. I've seen sometimes as low as 5%, and they call it still conventional financing. Usually not over 20%, but there are a lot of people that will just do conventional financing, and they just, for what their personal reasons, they want to put 50% down or even more. And that's obviously your client's choice. I always say, hey, I'm not here to advise you on the finances. That's why you have a lender. So whatever your lender suggests you do and recommends, I'm going to be on board with that, because I try not to overstep my bounds. Now, I'll give my clients perspective. I'll say, that sounds unusual to me in comparison to other contracts that I've written up over the years. but it's not unheard of. And so if your lender suggests that you put that amount down, then I'm going to stick with their advice, because they are the financial expert that you brought into this situation. Who can tell me the reasons that we would choose deed or contract? What's the difference there?
I feel like I'm the kid in the class that won't let anybody else answer.
You're fine, Nadine. I so appreciate you being in there.
A deed is the property transfers, and Trevor, correct me if I'm wrong. The property actually transfers. A contract would be a land sale contract where the property does not transfer to the buyer at the close of escrow.
That is my understanding as well. And I would say probably and Nadine, you can agree or disagree with me, probably 98% of the time or higher, we're choosing the deed box.
Absolutely.
It's very rare that we're going to be choosing the contract box, and that's at the direction of the buyer because of their situation or their lender's recommendation in that. So I don't know if I've ever chosen the contract portion in writing up an offer for my clients.
It's very rare, and some people get that confused with an owner carry contract. That
Correct.
is not correct. You don't do contract for owner carry. The only time I've ever chosen contract is on a land sale contract, and where the seller maintains the property in his name until the land sale contract has been paid off. And then it transfers it through escrow or through title, reconveyance. But anyway.
Yep. That sounds all, that jives with me, Nadine. So thank you for sharing that. One of the things I will point out is on the bottom of your contract, it should have your company and your name. Okay. Anytime you see an agent that writes up something that is not on their name, that actually should be reported, because all of us are paying for these tools and these systems and whatnot. And so if somebody is not legally having paid for their forms, they should not be using them. And it's not a disservice to reach out to your principal broker and say, hey, I got this contract. This is the person that's writing it up, and it's not their name at the bottom of it. What should I do? We're happy to help you to take on that responsibility. And in fact, we probably will make the call on your behalf. But we're all paying for these tools, right? It isn't fair for somebody to not have to pay for these tools and write up something.
As a seller's agent, if I were to have received this contract, I would send it back to Trevor because it is on a 2020 form and it is not a 2021 form.
Good eye, Nadine. I was hoping somebody would catch that right here. You can see this is on a 2020 form. And actually at the very beginning of this, I had taught a contract class in 2020. And that's why I pulled this in, was it is still on the 2020 contracts. There have been changes, and every year there are updates and changes to this contract. So a lot of these of what we're talking about are exactly the same. The contract does make changes over the years. And so what you will see in this class is probably some things that are left out because we are on that 2020 contract. When I teach this, the second section, I'll make sure that it is on the 2021 contract. So good eye, Nadine. Next section we're talking about is the fixtures. We are talking about what is affixed to the property. In regards to it even describes up here remote controls, all keys related to the property, including the mailbox, outbuildings, etc., but are not limited to built-in appliances. So it says this is what is in, this is what is out as far as what fixtures are and what fixtures are not. If there is any question to whether something is a fixture or not, what do you do? Somebody besides Nadine want to answer?
I mean, it's probably a simple conversation, right? Or,
Okay. Yep. It's probably a simple conversation, but again, conversations are not a part of the contract. So if it's under question as far as if it's a fixture or it's personal property, but you want it to be a part of the contract, write it in. That's as simple as it becomes. It even doesn't have to be a conversation. It can be as simple as just writing it in, just to create black and white clarity. This is included or this is not included. So in this section, when we're talking about fixtures, so thank you for, again, I can't see everybody's faces or names. So who was that chimed in?
that's Hannah.
Oh, Hannah. Oh, it's awesome. I'm so glad you're in this class. So this section right here, what you're putting in on these lines are, these are the exceptions. So this is what we're telling the buyer, or I'm sorry, the buyer is telling the seller, this is what we are not going to assume is going with the property. So all fixtures are to be included, except the seller is going to take with them the small cherry tree in the front yard and the silver chandelier in the entryway. So that means the seller is going to collect those items and head out with them when they leave. So those are the exceptions to all the fixtures. When it comes to personal property on lines 51 through 54, we're talking about, these are things that are included. These are going to stay with the property, even though they're not fixtures, even though they're not cabinetry or something that's stuck to the wall or stuck to the floor or grounded in the yard out front. These are things that we want included in the purchase of this property. So in this situation, they said the bed in the northeast bedroom, refrigerator in the garage, icebox freezer in the basement storage area, and pool table in the family room. Now, what are some of the what are the reasons that I put not only the item, but where the item is located? What's the reason I would do that?
There could be multiple items of like description. Maybe they have
Yep.
2 refrigerators.
Exactly. So I want the refrigerator in the garage. I'm not worried about the refrigerator in the kitchen. The seller had already told me they're taking that with them. So I made it nice and clear that I want the refrigerator in the garage and I want the icebox freezer that's in the basement storage area. I've seen buyer's agents even be as specific as writing in the model number of a refrigerator, because who's to say that a refrigerator in the kitchen, that is the white refrigerator in the kitchen, couldn't be switched out with another white refrigerator in the kitchen that is 10 years older. So, so it's important to be really specific, and the more black and white you are for your clients, the less likelihood of there being any arguments later. Does anybody have any stories about something getting switched out or taken that was not expected?
I do.
What was it, Nadine?
Well, they switched out the washer and dryer.
Oh.
And that lesson taught me that when I very seldom put personal property on the sale agreement, I usually say will be handled outside of escrow via a bill of sale, because the lender could want that valuation reduced from the LTV. But if it's cash, I'd be as specific as I can. But I also use the verbiage as seen in home on July 2nd, 2021. And then depending, I could even go, no item shall be replaced, or blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. Nadine, I love your contracts, because when they come through and I review them, I'm like, she's got it covered. And that comes from experience, right? I mean, we've been burned in the past. I've similar situation where a microwave was taken out. I had even a shower head a shower head is a fixture, but they took it out and replaced it with some other type of fixture that they. So it's things like that really, you just don't want to have arguments later. You don't want your buyer to go in there and be like, oh, what did they do? And then you've got to call up the listing agent, and then it becomes this whole argument as to, and really what it comes down to, guys, is that the only thing that we can go back to, even with conversations and stuff like that, is the contract. So write whatever you talk about back into the contract. If it's agreed upon later about, you know what, I didn't write it into the contract when we wrote the offer, but now that you're talking about that, there are 2 refrigerators in there, I'm just going to write up an addendum to say personal property to include that, you know, white refrigerator as seen on such and such a date. So it's okay to add those things later. Make sure all parties agree to that and that you're on the same page. And thank you, Nadine, for pointing out that sometimes lenders look at personal property as they would rather see it as a bill of sale. I've seen that as well. So sometimes it's not best to list it all out here. Sometimes it's better to list it as a bill of sale at X number of dollars, and it's a separate contract essentially. When we talk about financing, there's obviously quite a few options here. The first section, well, let's talk about the beginning portion up here. Buyer represents buyer has liquid available funds for earnest money deposit and down payment. And if in an all cash transaction, the full purchase price sufficient to close the transaction described herein is not relying upon any contingent source of funds. Okay, so what that's stating is any of your down payment is readily funds available. It can't be from proceeds from the sale of a house, or it can't be money that you need to take out of a 401k. Cannot be a gift that you're expecting from your parents. And if it is, it's okay, but you just need to describe it here. And you need to be clear to the other party that yes, we are getting funds that aren't in our checking account right now, and here's where they're coming from. So in this situation, the proceeds are from the property listed and currently pending at 123 East Main Street. And what I tend to do is describe it as much as possible so that they understand not only is it listed, but it's pending, and there's another amount of money coming from a retirement account. Otherwise, it's assumed that those cash funds are readily available and there won't be any hiccups later saying, oh, we didn't pull those funds out in time, and there's apparently I didn't know this, but there's a 5-day waiting period to get our funds. Those are the type of things that you are then out of contract because you did not disclose those at this point in the transaction or at any point to where the buyer and seller had an opportunity to agree upon them. So it's so important to disclose this stuff up front. If it's an all cash transaction, you obviously choose this box right here, and then you are going to include some type of verification of these funds. Has anybody had their verification of funds rejected by a seller and said, no, that's not good enough?
I had one that was 1 month behind. That it was February and it should have been for March.
Okay, so the contract was written in March and they wanted an updated verification of bank statement or something like that?
Maybe we wrote it in March and it was actually January funds. It was one or the other, something like that. Yeah,
which that makes sense. I mean, hey, a couple months have passed. Maybe they pulled out all their money and there was a lot of money in there, but now there's not. So I've even seen buyers and sellers a lot of times. It's great that they provide a statement, but a statement can be falsified. So sometimes it's nice to get a letter from the bank that basically says, yes, we verify, and here's the bank person's vice president or whatever of this particular branch that verifies the funds are currently in their account and described as follows and whatnot. So sometimes having that secondary follow-up is really important, just to verify that it's not just a sheet of paper that somebody printed off.
What do the rest of you use when they're using the funds for a transaction that's closing? So like I've had this first one this last week where the buyer was not able to provide us any kind of proof of funds and my seller was still asking for something. So if they're using the proceeds, would you just use the pending RMLS or what would you use?
So you described it up in lines 59 and 60 that there are proceeds that are to be received.
Mhm.
Okay,
So
then you probably need something from the title company that
Okay.
shows a seller's net sheet, right?
A seller's net
Uh,
sheet. Gotcha.
Yeah. So what is the seller going to net after closing, showing that they have paid off the loan, all that kind of stuff has been verified? That would probably be helpful. Any other suggestions out there for, that was Heather?
Yep.
Awesome.
When I do a pending contingent upon successful close of escrow for buyer's property located at, I provide as much information as possible to help them understand it's a solid deal. So I'll do the agent in the location where the home is being sold, the title company's contact information, and send that along with my offer so that they can verify immediately and make it a little bit stronger offer.
All right, moving on. If anything that's bolded, I always encourage the seller, or I'm sorry, the buyer to read. And actually, when I present it to the seller, I also encourage the seller to read those bolded statements. But with that said, we should be telling our buyers and our sellers, please read through the contract in full. If you have any questions, reach out to me and I'm happy to help you interpret what's being said in that section. But again, I'm not an attorney, and so I cannot give you any legal advice as far as the interpretation of that, of the contract. If they are financing something, then they are going to be checking this box, and then they have the option as to, is it conventional, FHA, federal VA, or something other, you know? And then they're going to provide a pre-approval letter. Are they providing it now? Are they providing it, don't have it at the time of this offer? And if they are providing it later, they will get a copy how. So you're going to describe all of that. It's always best with financing to have this, it's always best to have that first box. And there are rare circumstances that you may not be able to check this first box, but if you're on the seller side and you're looking at multiple offers and you've got a great offer, but it has no verification that they can actually purchase, then what good is that offer, right? So really important before you're writing contracts with your buyers that you are in communication with that buyer's lender and can get that pre-approval within hours of you, or even minutes of you getting ready to write that offer. So it's really important, open that line of communication with you and the buyer's lender.
I've got just a quick question for cash. I always like to obviously have their proof of funds along with the offer, especially in this market, and not say buyer will provide proof of funds, within a few days or whatever. I've had some banks who are totally willing to write a letter that says that they have, X amount of money. I've had a lot more banks tell my buyer that they cannot do that and they won't do that. And obviously you don't want to show your buyer's hand and just have them send you a screenshot of their bank account that has $300,000 more. So what are we doing in that case?
Well, any suggestions out there? I know I have some thoughts of my own, but anybody else?
I mean, I tend to get something eventually, but it's like most of the time they have more than what they're offering. So it's like they'll send a screenshot of their bank account and things like that and black out their personal information, of course. But I found it's a little bit challenging for the cash offers for them to get proof of funds without showing their cards.
Right. Well, I think the difference between showing a pre-approval letter ahead of time that's for the exact amount as opposed to a cash offer for well above amount is in any market, unless you're all competing cash offers, then a cash offer is definitely going to look stronger than just because of timing and stuff like that, and the hoops that you don't have to jump through. So I, in the past, have not been as worried about providing, let's say, a bank statement that shows they've got, $2 million in the bank. They can definitely afford this $400,000 beach house. With that said, part of the reason that they're that savvy and whatnot, and maybe making that offer is because they know their price point, right? They are set on their price, and just because I show you that I have $2 million doesn't mean I'm willing to spend $500,000 on a $400,000 house. So in the cash game, I don't think it becomes as much of a negotiating point, because I would almost be concerned if I got a buyer that says, I want to offer $400,000 in cash, but I've only got $400,000 in my bank statement. Because, okay, now where is the other, how are you paying your closing costs? Stuff like that. I don't think it's as big of a deal, but you could have them open another account, a secondary savings account, and push, that exact amount into that savings account. Because I know most banks will let you open multiple savings accounts. You could do something like that. That was going to be my other suggestion. Anybody else have any other suggestions?
Nadine.
All right, let's move on. Financing contingencies. If the buyer is financing any portions of the property, or I'm sorry, portion of the purchase price, then this transaction is subject to the following financing contingency. Obviously, the buyer still has to approve, and the lender's appraisal shall not exceed, or I'm sorry, not be less than the purchase price. Other things that I've seen written in there are like the example I've seen here, is where the appraisal measured square footage of the home must be within X number of square feet of the RMLS description showing that living space. They want to make sure that they are actually purchasing the square footage that they are being asked to purchase, if that makes sense, but can be over by any amount, just to bring clarity to it. That's probably used more often in a buyer's market than it is used right now in a seller's market. But that's anybody else in any other financing contingencies written in to a contract? Okay, we are running out of time. I just realized how slow I'm going, and I do apologize. Failure of financing contingencies. This is talking about if the buyer is not able to approve or something changes in their financing, they have 2 days from which they find out about that to give notice. In this situation, because they wrote in 2 business days. Now you could change that to 5, you could change that to 1, but whatever is written here is you have that many number of days to notify the other party, notify the seller, or terminate, obviously. But if they don't, if they wait a week and I lost my job last week, we were trying to keep it together, I was trying to find another job, that's not part of this. This is saying that if you fail in your financing contingencies, you need to give the seller notice so that they can choose to terminate because you no longer can afford to purchase this property. Does that make sense? Or any questions about that? Before we run out of time here, what are some of the things that you guys are writing into? Because I promised I would talk about this, is multiple offers. What are you guys writing into multiple offer situations that maybe help your offer to stand out? Any suggestions here? It could be, and I'm not talking about just this section, I'm probably more talking about the personal property section or the pricing point. What are you guys writing into your multiple offer when you know you're going to be competing against other offers? No one's going to share?
I don't have any, I haven't had any listings yet, but I would assume love letters, like as personal as they can get to the seller to make theirs stand out.
Okay.
Trevor's kind of on the fence with those letters.
I am. Thank you for noticing that.
I do them all the time, even though Trevor is on the fence. I still do them and they do work a little bit, but there
Mhm.
are some possible legalities behind them.
Yeah. And the legalities behind them are really in relation to the fairness, right? We're talking about could the seller interpret something about the buyer and be biased or be, what am I trying to say? The whole fair housing situation. Let's say it's a person of another race and they're like, oh gosh, now that I know if you put a picture of the people in there or just even by their last name or anything like that, could the seller say no to this offer and yes to this offer, all things being equal? They said no to this offer because of that love letter. So and here's my perspective on the seller's side. When you've listed the property, I will tell my sellers, hey, we have received multiple offers. This one comes with a letter, but I want to warn you that I don't suggest you look at this letter. I've not looked at this letter and I tend to only look at the numbers because I want to treat all parties fairly and equally. Everybody probably that has written an offer, I can share with you that they probably love your home, right? Or they wouldn't be making an offer. And so the love letters or whatever you want to call them, these letters that are trying to sway or entice a seller to purchase your property can be good, but they can also majorly backfire. And so that's how I handle it on the listing side. And what a seller does with that is up to them because I cannot, it's my legal responsibility to provide everything that's been included with that offer. But I can also suggest to them that, don't take this into account because there could be legal ramifications later. So that's just my 2 cents on how I handle it on the seller side. But with that said too, Hannah, I have had in the past over the last probably 10 years, I've had my clients write probably hundreds of love letters until I realized what the legal, and I never ran into a situation where they have backfired, but it only takes one, right? To where it could go wrong. So anyway, there is a risk. There's a risk to all of this, guys, as to how we communicate and what we provide. And so I think the most important thing you should get out of my advice is that take it with a grain of salt, is that there is a risk to these extra things that we do or suggest. And sometimes we weigh those risks and we suggest our clients do them anyway, because that's what gets our offer over the hump. Any other, I feel like I'm on a pedestal, like preaching or something like that. Does anybody else have any other thoughts on that?
What are you doing in this crazy market? I mean, we're probably all doing the same, and I always answer my own question, but I've got a guy, he's more than qualified for a great, around 700,000. And we've been putting in, I put in 6 offers up to $32,000 over. I've used the escalator clause. I use the, he'll make up the difference up to a certain amount of any low appraisal. And we're just getting our ass handed to us every time. And he's getting frustrated, and it's like, it's not me, it's the market. What are you using as leverage, or what have you seen that's working besides maybe those 2 things, or in your opinion right now?
Okay. One of the things, I think this goes back to advice that I was giving when I first got into real estate, is that you are respected in this industry by how you treat other agents, right? So with that said, it's not only what offer I send over, it's how I communicate over that offer. Am I being communicative as to, hey, we've got a great offer for you. I've already talked with the lender. The lender is completely on board. In fact, I can have the lender reach out to you, Mr. Listing Agent, to explain how qualified our buyer is. Beyond that, I want to make sure that number one is I don't just shoot over an offer in an email. I shoot over an offer with an email. I follow up with a phone call and a text. you're setting yourself up for how is this person going to, if I'm the listing agent, how is this person going to communicate to me during the transaction is based on how they are communicating to me when they've submitted their offer. So that's really, in my personal opinion, that's really important. How we communicate with other agents in our community is really important. How we treat them is really, really important. And then beyond that is, I recently had a conversation with an agent. She found out after all the offers were submitted, the agent called her up and said, wow, it was really, really close. We want to offer your clients second position. Unfortunately, you lost out by $50. And my agent she was like, are you kidding me? We lost out by $50? And so I sat there and I talked with her through that. And I said, well, what could we have done differently given all things being equal? Obviously, the offers truly were pretty much equal.
Mhm.
Number one is the other agent on the other side wrote it up with a small $50. It was like $425,000 and $50 at the very end of that was there. So they knew that here's our cap, but we're willing to go $50 over anyway. So using odd numbers can be another suggestion. And then beyond that was I suggested that, and this won't work with all agents on the listing side, because if they're dealing with 20 offers, it's hard to have 20 different buyer's agents communicating to me. But if you're dealing with just 2 or 3 offers, then to me, I think it would behoove you to call up that agent and say, hey, you know what, Hannah, if we're within, say, $1,000 or $2, would you just do me a favor and reach out to me and let me know that before you sign any other offer? Because what I can guarantee you on my side is not only are we going to make this a great transaction for my client, but we're going to make this a great transaction for everyone involved. That includes you, that includes your clients. And so just give me the opportunity, if we're within a couple $1,000s of upping our offer if we need to, because all things being equal, I know we have the best lender. I know I will communicate and make this easy on all the other parties. So it's all those smaller factors that when it comes down to, sometimes it's the relationship, right? That we're like, gosh, all things being equal, I'd rather work with this agent than with this agent. And that's tough, but it's honest, I think. And so if we're over communicative in a positive way, it might get your offer accepted.
Okay, I like, yep, thank you.
Yeah. All right, well, guys, we are 2 minutes to the ending of this. I'm going to just keep busting through because I promised to go through 5 pages. So if you want to stick with it, you can hang out. If not, I'm going to keep going, and this will be on a video later. We were down to the section right here of, where was it? Failure of financing contingency, as I already explained that. The buyer's representation regarding financing. This section is talking about that the buyer makes the following representations to the seller. Number one, that the buyer's completed loan application as herein defined shall be submitted to the lender who provided that pre-approval letter. And basically that they are going, if they have, what these is talking about is that they will complete, now hopefully it says complete a loan application for purchase property not later than 3 business days. So guys, if you aren't having your clients pre-approved before they're writing an offer, this really doesn't apply. I mean, but you're always going to write in, I do not leave blanks in my contracts. That's another thing that I would suggest is anytime you leave a blank, unless that section is not being used, like up here, I would not put, whoops, sorry, I went too far. Obviously, if this is not an all cash transaction, I'm not going to put anything in here. So I am going to leave that section blank because I am choosing section B. That's what we're using. So what I'm saying here is I've seen a lot of times agents leave these things blank saying, well, it already says there 3 if not filled in. so it's 3. Yeah, well, you know, in a court of law, the judge is probably going to look at that and say, yeah, it's 3 if left blank, but is it left blank because you knew it was going to be 3, or was it left blank because you didn't even explain that to your clients? Do they even know what the section is about? And so rather than lean on the left blank, didn't even explain it to my clients, I always fill these sections in, even if they are the 3 business days. What's nice about your templates, guys, is you can fill these in automatically so that when you pull up your contract, they're already pre-filled in. And then all you have to do is make some changes to certain sections if you feel like that this particular offer needs to be slightly different than the norm. Anytime that you can shorten timelines with your offers for buyers in this seller's market, that is beneficial, right? If the seller knows that they don't have to wait 10 days for an inspection period, they only have to wait for 7 days or 5 days to go through the inspection period, that's beneficial. That puts your offer slightly higher than what is typically known as the norm right now. So again, don't leave any blanks. There are a lot of sections in here. I'm not going to read them all out to you because that is what you need to be doing as an agent. You need to be able to read through these, and you need to be able to give your client an overview of what these sections are about. So obviously the 6.1 is about insurance, the 6.2 about flood insurance and the elevation certificate. We don't make any changes to these sections, but you need to understand and be able to explain those to your clients. Sometimes these sections do apply, sometimes they do not apply, depending on where the property is located. So it's important to help your clients to understand if they do or do not apply. In the old days, when we wrote these contracts out by hand, we would literally scratch through and say, this section does not apply to your offer. Unfortunately, we can't do that with all the digital sections. And actually, looking back, I probably would not advise scratching out sections and saying this does not apply, because what if later it does? Then you've become the expert on a property that you're writing an offer on and not necessarily know the full story. Because I've seen sections like flood insurance and an elevation certificate be scratched out because they're like, oh, it's up on a hill. I highly doubt this is in a flood zone. And then it ends up being in a flood zone. And so then how do you put that back into the contract? So it's probably important not to scratch out or say this does not apply. Seller carried financing, again, a section that is rarely used, but it can be used. And I've actually used it personally in a situation where I helped my wife and I to purchase land where we could not get a bank to finance a land offer for us. So the seller carried a contract for us for a couple of years while we got our house ready to build on that. And then we carried it over into a construction loan. So seller carried financing, a lot of times you can reach out to your title company because we are not mortgage experts. We should not jump into being mortgage experts. If you ever get into this section and you're like, hey, this is a situation where we can't find financing for this particular property or this particular piece of land, I highly advise, if you haven't done it before, is reach out to your principal broker, reach out to your title company and say, I need some advice on how to handle this and how to write this in as a seller carried financing. Because essentially what you're doing is you're saying, okay, Mr. Seller, we want to purchase the property from you, but we want you now to become the bank that will finance the property for us. And so that's, and like Nadine had talked about earlier, is those are sometimes situations where you have a contract rather than a deed in that section, but not always. There's a lot of times that you do get the deed in that section up here, right here, that you would, even on a seller carried contract, write in that closing upon delivery of a deed, even with a seller carried contract. Any questions so far? I don't even know if there's anybody still in the room, but I'm going to keep going. All right, so additional financing provisions. This is where we would write in closing costs or any other financing provisions that are not carried in the above financing section. This is where we would write in, like, the seller is to pay for the buyer's closing costs and prepaid items. Now, I would encourage you in multiple offer situations, this does not look good. The more that the buyer can take care of on their own, the better. But there are buyers that don't have a lot to put down. There are buyers that don't have a lot of extra cash on hand. And unfortunately, they're probably going to lose out on a lot of offers until they finally find the seller that is a little more desperate to sell. So, but this is where we would put in those closing costs that the sellers to pay. In this situation, I wrote in $8,245 of the buyer's closing costs and prepaid items. Does anybody know why we write in that portion as well? It's not just closing costs, but prepaid items. Why do we write in prepaid items? Is anybody there that could answer that question or take a guess?
Is that the prorated for the taxes if they've already paid for the year?
That is correct. So prepaid items are things like your insurance, your taxes that are not closing costs. And so what's nice is we can ask the seller to pay for portions of those prepaid items. Great answer. Contingencies. This is the contingency section of the contract. We just finished page 3. We're moving on to page 4. The contingency section talks a lot about, okay, like title insurance. The whole reason we have a title company is they're going to pull a preliminary title report, make sure that the buyer and the seller are on key point, that there's no monies owed on this property other than that nobody else has written recorded a lien on the property, things like that. So basically what this comes down to and why we write in 5 business days is that, again, bolded section, let's read this. If upon receipt, the report and documents of record are not fully understood, buyer should contact the title insurance company for further information or seek competent legal advice. The buyer and seller's agent are not qualified to advise on specific legal or title issues. Okay, so it's as title reports or preliminary title reports, as they're a lot of times called, are sent out to us and our clients. It's not our responsibility to interpret those for our clients. I always point my clients back to, let's reach out to your escrow officer, and she will point us in the right direction within her company as to who can help get answers for the questions that you have. Now, the reports that are sent to them could be everything from CC&Rs. What is a CC&R? Can anybody tell me what a CC&R is? CC&R.
Conditions, rules and restrictions or something like that.
Yep. Covenants, conditions, and restrictions. These are basically the rules of a particular neighborhood. It basically says what you can and cannot do within that neighborhood. Also, covenants, conditions, and restrictions could be just on, it could be that like maybe a particular property was subdivided at some point, and the property that's a little bit further up on the hill put a covenant on this property or a condition on the property that they can only build a house that is so tall because I don't want you blocking my view. You can only build a 2-story property up to 22 feet high. You can go no further or higher than that because I want to keep my view of the ocean. And so covenants, conditions, and restrictions, what this section is basically saying is as you receive those documents from the title company, once you have received them, you have 5 business days to review that. If you put a 5 in here, or if you leave it blank, you could put in a 6, you could put in a 3. It's completely up to you and your buyer. But the average days is 5 right now. As you receive that information, you have 5 business days to review that information. And if you object to anything that you see in there, and you're like, gosh, working on my car in the front yard is really important to me, but this particular neighborhood doesn't allow you to put a truck up on blocks and do that. This is not the neighborhood for me. I have 5 business days to review that information that was provided to me. And if I object, I need to let everybody know. Otherwise, if I say nothing, then I have deemed to been accepted that information, and I'm A-okay with everything that's in there. So I always tell my buyers, hey, I don't know when you're going to get these reports from the title company, but as soon as you do, that time clock starts. Okay. So if they can show proof that you received it on the 1st of April, then you have until 5 p.m. on the 6th of April to say, I object. I do not want to buy this property anymore. Otherwise, you're deemed to have accepted that report.
Trevor, will
right.
you say again when that starts?
It starts
When
when
the
they
title
have,
company?
it starts when they, so the title reports that are sent to our clients, it starts when that information has been received by our clients.
Okay, so not whenever the seller signs the paperwork and we get it. It's actually
Nope.
through title.
It's
Okay,
through title. It's when those, it says right here, upon receipt of the report and documents, buyer shall have 5 business days within to notify seller in writing of matters disclosed on the reports which are unacceptable. Okay, they're objections. So they could
Thank you.
get a report on the 1st and they have 5 business days to review that. And then let's say they let's say the contract was mutually accepted on the 28th or even the 25th of the previous month. If I don't receive the report until the 1st of the April, then I have until the 6th of April. Let's say I get the next report from the title company on the 7th. I still have 5 business days to review that, and I have until the 12th to object. Okay, so these timelines start when the information is received by the client. Inspections, environmental health conditions. This is a basic overview and basically tells the buyers, hey, here's some websites that you need to go to. I highly, highly suggest that you point these out to your clients. And I highly, highly suggest that you email these links to your clients and point out where they can find that buyer advisory, okay? Buyer advisory and the Oregon Public Health Division. Here's where you can find information from them. And so it's really important that we use not only these, but we actually have buyer advisories that we give out to our clients. There's the COVID-19 addendum. There is the buyer's packet that we have. So clients sign off that they have received this information. And so in the contract, again, everything has to be a part of the contract to be part of the contract. And that's where they point this out. And so this is basically saying, hey, it's really important to have inspections because there's all this horrible stuff that could be a part of your property. Carbon monoxide, electromagnetic fields, so on and so forth. Mold, mildew, radiation, well water is bad. Okay, all those kind of things. So it's just pointing out and advising the buyers, do your due diligence. Now there are options here, right? We can have just the basic overview of a licensed professional inspection. We could choose this section, and this is probably a bare minimum of what you would want to choose for your clients. Okay, the licensed professional inspections. Invasive inspections is anything where you might need to take a scraping of, say, like a ceiling to get to do some testing on asbestos or something like that. That's an invasive inspection. A sewer scope could be considered invasive. It could be considered not invasive. Depends on if you have to remove a toilet to get that sewer scope down into it. So I tend to lean on the that most are considered invasive. Radon testing could be considered invasive in that the seller has to have this contraption sitting in their house for 3 to 10 days, depending on how much radon testing is being done. So what I tend to write in here, if I'm only going to use this section, try to keep it nice and simple for the seller to approve our offer, is I'll put in just some of these things that might happen: sewer scope, radon testing, and any other as recommended by a buyer's professional inspector. Now, again, the more that you put in here, the less likely, if all things being equal, and somebody else is saying, hey, we're going to waive inspections. That's a choice. A buyer can choose to waive inspections. If they choose to waive their inspections, we're going to have them sign off on a different document that says, you, Mr. Buyer, even against our advice, are going to choose to waive all inspections. You can change this. It doesn't have to be 10 days. You could change it to 7 days to make it tighter and make it more appealing to the seller. You could change it to 5 days if you wanted to. all things that you can do, and you need to advise your client of these are risks. Yeah, are we even going to get an inspector? Inspections are kind of backing up right now. Are we going to have enough time to get an inspection if it's only in 5 days? So you might be, before you even write up the offer, you might be reaching out to inspectors. Hey, can I get you there on, if we get mutual acceptance, can I get you there on Thursday at 2 o'clock for my client's inspection? Anything else anybody else would write in here that they want to share? Alternative inspection procedures. You can also choose this box, but if you choose this box, you're going to need to use the addendum. And I am not going to go into that right now, but we will do that at a later contract class. So that's another alternative to choosing the first box. Going down to the next section, you could choose an other inspection addendum if you had a special one written up, or you can choose the buyer's waiver of inspection contingency, that you are knowingly and voluntarily electing to waive the rights to have inspections. Now, I don't advise this, especially for first-time home buyers, but there are some pretty savvy people out there that can do their own thing and have the money to fix things later, so they might choose to do that. Lead-based paint contingency period. This is standard for any property that was built or constructed before 1978. It says it right up here in this first section, right there. So this would then again include a addendum for it, and it is OREF 021, okay? We're not gonna go into that, but it will obviously apply if it applies based on the year the home was constructed. Private well section, does it include it? Does it not? These are sections that you need to ask and make sure that you know based on the other property. The property disclosure section talks about everything that the seller is responsible for disclosing. You're going to receive this information from the seller at a later point if we reach mutual acceptance, or you can even ask for it ahead of time if you want to. And then the seller's representations. We want to make sure that we are clear on, is it public? Is it on-site sewer? Is it public water? Is it a private well? All those kind of things. And basically, I fill it in as what the buyer knows, okay? I've seen buyer's agents say, well, are we supposed to leave this blank because it's the seller is representing and they should fill this in later? No, 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 no. The buyer fills it out based on what has been provided to them. If the seller accidentally said in RMLS or in the multiple listing service that there was a private well, but they're actually on public, then you're going to fill this in as what you know, and then they're going to have to respond and change that with an addendum later. I almost always say no exceptions to the above unless there was something that was disclosed ahead of time. And we are at the end of page 5. So guys, if you are headed out already, or if you stuck with us, thank you so much for being here. And this will be a recording later. Does anybody else have any other questions before we go? I'm going to stop sharing so we can see each other. All right. Well, you guys have a great rest of your week. This will be a video that will be available later if you want to go over it. And we'll see you later.
Thanks, Trevor.
Thank you,
You're
Trevor.
welcome.
Bye.
Bye-bye.